You're listening to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickass.com/episode 64.
Welcome to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Yossi Ghinsberg is an Israeli-Australian adventurer, musician, tech entrepreneur, author, and motivational speaker. In 1981, Yossi ventured into the remote and uncharted Bolivian Amazon jungle with 3 other backpackers in search of adventure. After a series of events and accidents, Yossi was separated from the others and spent 3 weeks alone and lost deep in the Amazon. Yossi was faced with tremendous hardships, including almost drowning in whitewater rapids and going over waterfalls, starvation, hallucinations, multiple full-body wounds, trench foot, coming face to face with a Jaguar at night, being enveloped by tens of thousands of fire ants, flooding, being trapped torso deep in a swamp, sleep deprivation, all of which happened during the heaviest torrential rain season in a decade. Yossi's famous story has now been made into a feature film called Jungle, which will be released in 2017, starring Daniel Radcliffe from Harry Potter fame. Yossi goes into detail around his extraordinary experience and chance rescue, and has since gained enlightened wisdom. Enjoy the interview. Yossi Ghinsberg, welcome to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast.
Thank you. I love that name, and really, I'm also honored to make it into that list. Thank you.
That's all good. Now, you've recently moved to Australia, I believe. It's not, you sort of live not too far from where I live. What made you want to move to Australia?
Well, first of all, I'm Aussie.
Yep.
You know, my name is Yossi, so I call it Yossi. And I was born on April 25th, which happens to be Anzac Day, and I have an Australian passport, so I call Australia home. I came here in 1999, and I opened a clinic for the treatment, detoxification, rehabilitation, and reintegration of opiate addicts. I received a business visa, and for 3 years I operated 2 clinics in that context. While I was here, I met my wife, I married her, we moved to Byron Bay, we bought a property in the hinterlands of Byron Shire, and we lived here for 7 years. We left and been in Israel for 9 years, and my wife said it's time to go back home. So we moved just about 2 months ago, and we're back in the biggest small town in the known universe, Mullumbimby.
Yeah, no, it's a great area. Now, I've today or all week, I've been listening to your audiobook, Jungle, and I've actually just finished it today. It's an incredible story. And yeah, I wanted to get you on the podcast and give you the opportunity of sort of sharing your story. It's such an incredible story that it's almost hard to believe the things that you went through and you experienced. You know, if we sort of rewind back until, like, you were about 21 at the time, was that right?
That's right, yeah.
Can you give listeners like an overview of, or start to share with us, what made you want to go to Bolivia, and in particular, how did the seed of wanting to explore the Amazon jungle come about?
It came many, many years before. it wasn't exactly the Amazon jungle, but I was really an avid reader, and I loved adventure books, and they inspired my imagination as a kid, as an adolescent, and I also have a tendency to daydream. I always had this tendency. So I read a lot of adventure books, and in my daydreams, because I wasn't listening to the teachers, I was just busy daydreaming. I saw myself as a great explorer, like it was the North, the poles and the deserts. But then I read one book, which is Papillon by Henri Charrier. And once I read that, I decided where I'm going is the Amazon. And I'm going to search for a tribe that was not explored before. And then I'll try and be one of them. I'll integrate. I'll fall in love with the daughter of the chief. I'll marry her. I'll find riches of gold, either lost treasures or gold. And I will, have this amazing adventure. And the only thing with it, I was serious about it, And when it was time, which is after I was released from the military service, I actually worked for a year, a long year. I worked a winter in Norway, and a spring in Alaska, and a summer in New York. So for a year, I just worked to save money for this adventure. And then I flew to Venezuela to search for Papillon himself, because I knew where he lived. At that time, there was no internet, and I arrived just a few months after he died. But I wanted to get his personal blessing, the author of Papillon, Henri Charrier.
Yeah.
And from Venezuela down, I was searching for that adventure. I searched for it everywhere, in Venezuela, in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru. I went into all the jungles and asking where can I find tribes. And I did have a few adventures with tribes in different places, but there weren't unexplored tribes. So I started feeling that maybe the time of great adventure is already behind us. Until one day in the streets of La Paz, Bolivia, I met an Austrian man that introduced himself as a geologist. And he told me that that's what he does. He goes into the uncharted, he looks for treasures, and his way of finding treasures is by making contact with indigenous people, especially ones that are not known to culture. And through them, he learns about the riches around. I didn't know he was just a talented con artist. The man basically sniffed my own dream and sold it back to me. And I just fell, for that. And I pleaded with him to take me on this great adventure. And two of my friends, two backpackers that met me at, the hostel, they thought I'm crazy. And trying to prevent me from going, they came with me to meet that Austrian geologist. And they also fell in his trap. So after that meeting, we were a foursome. And the Austrian geologist, the guide, and three backpackers. Kevin Gale, an American photographer, 29 years old, from Oregon, like a really awesome country, American, strong man and passionate photographer. Marcus Stump, 28 years old, a school teacher from a relatively small town in Switzerland, Schaffhausen, that was on a sabbatical. And myself, just fresh out of the military service in Israel, 22 years old. And the Austrian geologist was from Austria. He was 38 years old. That's how the foursome was formed.
And when you guys, made the decision to head into the jungle, were you sort of wanting to go just like real deep into the jungle, or just sort of around the outskirts of the jungle? Can you maybe talk about that?
Absolutely. It was clear that we were going into the uncharted. We knew that. And also we realized very soon what it means, even before we left town, because there were no maps of this area. So we understood the meaning of what uncharted means. And the map that we took was an aerial, 1 to 250,000 kilometers. So it was just a very general map of the entire area. But the tributaries and the rivers and the mountain ranges were marked. and the geologist just placed a pen in one place, and he said, the Toromonas, those indigenous people, they live around this area, and that's where we're going. It was deep, deep into the uncharted, far, far from any civilization, and so we knew we were going very, very deep in.
How heavy were the packs that you were taking? Were you taking in addition to your clothes and your survival gear, and I believe you guys had a shotgun as well? Were you carrying food and that as well with you?
Not really, because the logic was that if we have a shotgun, we have rice and beans, so the main dish will come from the forest. We'll hunt. There's lots of game in the forest, Carl promised us, and we will have plenty of food. Nobody goes hungry in the jungle, he told us. So all we took was rice and beans, and we relied on the shotgun for food. Well, it didn't go exactly like that. I mean, it did eventually, but it wasn't as exotic as we thought, because very soon we discovered that the staple food and the easiest hunt when you hike in the jungle are monkeys. So our staple food became howlers monkeys and spider monkeys. Occasionally a wild turkey, and occasionally a fish. But monkeys we ate more than any other animal. We ate one sloth one time, even a frog. But this caused also problems because Marcus, the Swiss school teacher, he was too delicate and too loving to eat. He lost weight and also lost respect, and that's one of the tragedies of our adventure.
So prior to heading into the jungle, had you ever killed and prepared an animal prior to this, the Amazon experience, or was this sort of like your first go at sort of killing animals and preparing them and eating them? Had you done that before or not?
Yeah, I made a living as a fisherman for a few years, and I was spearfishing. So I was spearfishing on a daily basis. I was diving every day a few hours, free diving, and I was fishing a day and night. I was literally, I'm not joking, fighting sharks in the water, because when you fish in the Red Sea and there's a lot of blood and it's infested with sharks, the sharks come after you and you don't want to give them your catch. So I even fought sharks underwater and more eagles. So I had a lot of experience as a fisherman, which involves killing, because I realized the fish do want to live and they do bleed and they do run away. And so I killed lots of, but fish. I didn't kill other animals. Thank God I didn't kill a man. Though I was 3 years in the Navy, I was very fortunate not to wound or kill anybody as a soldier. But I've seen Bedouins kill, wild goats in the desert, and I ate with them and feasted with them. There was some thrill in the kill, also in the jungle, because we were so hungry. It was repulsive to eat the first monkey, but later we got used to it. In fact, the biggest howler that we killed, it was me that hunted him down. I shot it. I don't know if that's going to make me very popular in today's environment, but I'm just telling you that the kill was, in a way, a thrill. It was part of the wilderness. We were deep, deep in the wilderness. It was almost, we didn't belong in time. It could have been any time. It was so primal, and there was a real need to survive. This was real situation. We were hungry. We were walking all day. This was really wild, deep nature. We needed to eat, and this was just the beginning, It became, as we'll get to the other parts where food was, I learned something very deep about food, but that will come later.
What part of the monkeys do you eat? Is it like all the main muscular parts of the monkeys? Like I'm sort of guessing biceps, rump, thigh, calves. Are they sort of the main bits that you eat?
Look, the way you prepare a monkey, you don't cook it, you smoke it. Yeah. So there's a certain way. You clean it first of all in the river, then you burn it completely in the fire, so all the fur is burned, and then you fold it up in a flat way. You just put the hands behind the head and you tie them with some, like with some vine. You do the same with the legs, and you flatten the monkey, and the monkey is totally open, and you smoke it overnight, and then you eat everything. You just eat every single thing, the tail, the fingers. Carl also just broke the skull and poured the brains into the soup.
Yeah.
In short, you don't leave anything. You just eat the entire thing.
Yeah. Now, as you guys were setting off and heading deeper and deeper into the jungle, I wasn't quite sure about this, like listening to the audiobook, but were you heading along sort of trails at all? Like as you were, eventually you came across, villages that were sort of deeper into the jungle. Were there sort of like trails and tracks heading to and from these places that you visited?
No, the way it went is like we walked 4 days on a trail until the last community, which is called Asaryamat. After that community, there were trails, but those trails actually led nowhere, because there were trails that were made by hunters from Asaryamat that went into the forest and back to the village. So they weren't leading anywhere. So the only way for us to navigate was actually to stick to the rivers and then to cross mountain range to find a water source that will lead us to a bigger water source until we'll identify the next river so we know where we are. And basically it was like that. Big rivers, tributaries, and mountain ranges to cross. There were no trails. There were absolutely no trails beyond Asaryamat. The river was, of course, the most important guide. And the river is actually, it's complex because it's not the best way to walk, just because sometimes, especially at that time, which I mean is when it starts raining, the rivers are high, so there are no playas, which means you walk in pretty dense bush near the river. And most of the time, we couldn't walk inside the river because they were too deep and swift. In creeks and tributaries, we could walk inside the water, but this was actually very dangerous because, a small accident like, tearing a ligament or twisting an ankle or, it's very dangerous. And also you get blisters and rashes and everything becomes wet. So in the water, outside the water, it was pretty extreme just to keep on walking. It was on the verge of the rainy season. I think we entered the jungle something like the 3rd of November, which is very late. And
you guys, walked for a number of days into the jungle, and then I believe that you guys sort of came to a decision where you decided to turn back to one of the villages. What was the reason for wanting to turn back?
It was heartbreaking. I didn't want to turn back. We had to vote because Marcus, basically, again, the Swiss guy, first of all, he didn't want to continue. And secondly, he couldn't continue. The part that he didn't want, he was worried because we were supposed already to get to the village, but we didn't get even close to the village. By that stage, I mean the indigenous tribe, not the village. That's mysterious tribe that we were supposed to make contact with. But at that stage, we weren't sure if this tribe exists or not because we already learned that our guide is a is a pathological liar because he was changing the stories. So we weren't sure if he's leading us to a real place, so he just made it up. And Marcus wasn't eating the game that we hunted. And the rice and beans were running short. He was really worried. He wanted to go back. On top of that, he had a very bad rash, which it wasn't rash. It's more like a fungal infection, more like an athlete foot maybe situation when wounds start opening on the feet, and it was painful. And it was part of his downfall, emotionally, mentally, and physically.
Yep.
And spiritually, it was very sad in a way. Yeah, it was difficult to see the breakdown. But on the other hand, it was the reason why we had to turn back and give up our dreams.
So you made the decision, all four of you headed back, you're still like deep in the jungle, you headed back to one of the villages.
The last village, to the last point, which is, again, that village, Asaryamas, the last village.
And was that where you guys decided to build a raft?
That's right.
Yeah, can you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. So it was actually Kevin's idea. He said, look, now we reached the trail and we can put Marcus on a mule with one of the indigenous people there, and he will take him out to civilization, to the place where an airplane will take him back to La Paz. So Kevin said, why don't we continue the adventure? Marcus can evacuate from here, and we will just continue the adventure because, we felt disappointed. So we wanted to get more. And we said, we'll build a raft and run the entire river all the way to civilization, run that wild river to Ichi. So there was excitement about this new adventure. And Marcus then said, no, I want to continue. I'm not going back. And he insisted, which we didn't understand why, but he insisted, and we yielded. And again, all the four of us got on the raft. It took like a good week. The villagers, we helped them build a raft for us, made of balsa wood. And then we ran the raft down river, which that's where the really difficult part of the journey begins.
So when you guys set off now on the raft, were you sort of travelling for a number of days, like on the raft down the river?
Yes. There were a few short days. The reason they were short, it was hell. It was chaotic hell. And even though Carl was crazy, liar, very colorful person, he was really a master of the jungle. This man was unbelievable with the knowledge of the rainforest that he had, and especially with the use of the machete. He did everything, and we learned from him all the survival skills. He was the master, He could find water on top of the mountain just by cutting one vine. He would show us the right roots to eat and how to collapse the palm tree that has the palm heart that you can eat. He would make fire even in the rain. He could start fire and make dry kindling. He was a master of the element. He would find the rubber tree and tap the rubber and fix the shoes. He would take a fishing line and sew the clothes. He was really amazing. But on the raft, he was the only one that couldn't swim. And he lost his power. And he was really afraid of the water, and it was noticeable. And Kevin came from Oregon, from the Dalles, it's above Portland. And it was like really a nature boy. He grew up, and actually his family in the summer, they run a whitewater business on the rivers. He's like a professional whitewater rafter. And he thought that it's all bullshit, that the river is nothing, is not even dangerous, and all the trouble we have are because of this guide. But the guide, Carl, refused to give Kevin the helm. He refused to let him lead. And they were fighting between them in an extreme way that split us, because Marcus listened to Carl, I listened to Kevin. and we stopped talking to each other. They were speaking German, we were speaking English, and we were four men shooting white water in a wild river, but we were speaking two different languages and not talking to each other. It was catastrophic. It was and the oars fell into the water, and the poles break, and we hit every rock. We fell into the water. It was really dangerous. On the other hand, the river is so fast, it took us further away from civilization, because the river is not like walking in the forest. You just turn and walk back. One day down river is a big walk. So that's what happened on the river.
Now, there's sort of like a pivotal part in the story where on the actual river there was a pass, and there was Carl was sort of saying that the raft couldn't go through this really treacherous pass where there was really full on rapids and rocks everywhere, and it was too dangerous.
Yeah.
Can you maybe tell us about that and the accident that was pivotal?
Okay. Well, this pass is actually quite famous. It's famous because it's unpassable. It's possible in the dry season, but in the rainy season, it's impossible to. And we were in the rainy season already. And so the initial plan was to stop before the canyon, and the two would walk around it and wait on the other side, and on agreed time, the other two will release the raft into the canyon. The other two will catch the raft on the other side, which is, like a couple of days walk. It's just to walk around it. It's not 30 minutes. And so it was a crazy idea just how to get. But when we got closer to it, Carl said, I don't trust you. I'm not risking my life anymore. So fuck it. I'm not continuing. You want to die, you die without me. I'm just walking out of here through the jungle. And he showed us a tributary, and he said that if we follow this tributary by foot, we will get to some trail, that there is some village, nothing is marked on the map, and that from that village we'll be able to walk to civilization. This was actually a relief because it was hell on the river. And also we knew that in the jungle, Carl knew what he was doing. So I was relieved. Marcus seemed relieved. Carl was, I don't care what you do. I'm out of here. So Kevin yielded as well. And then we stopped and we decided we'll get back into the jungle and walk. It's only that Kevin pulled me aside to the bush and he said, listen, let them walk alone. You stay with me and let's continue on the raft. And he convinced me to join him on the raft and actually part from Marcus and Carl. This was pretty dramatic. And I didn't want to do it, but I said yes. I never told him I didn't want to do it. Because I cannot, it's hard to explain, but I was the youngest. He was like the big guy, the tough guy. I was 22, he was 29. He was strong, and, we befriended each other. And in a way, I just, I didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't want to show him that I'm afraid. I didn't want to let him down. So more for that than for desire for more adventure, I agreed to go with him. The problem was that when we came back and told that to Marcus and Carl, Marcus said, I'm not leaving here. We are three friends. We stick together. And that's maybe the heart of the story because we didn't agree. Kevin and I discussed that and we decided to tell him that we do not agree. And it broke his heart. But he yielded and he agreed to live with Carl and Mark. That's how we split. He went with Carl and Kevin and I continued alone.
How many days into this adventure were you? At this point where you and Carl were going to continue on the raft down the river And
Kevin.
you and Kevin, and Carl and Marcus were going to head on foot back the other way. How many days into this adventure were you at this point?
1 month.
A month. So you're a month
Yes.
into this Amazon adventure.
Yes.
At that moment, looking back, that was the last time you saw those two.
That's right.
So those two, when you guys headed off down on the raft, that was actually the last time you saw Carl and Marcus.
That's right. Nobody ever saw them again.
So they just disappeared. No one knows what happened to them from that point on.
Nobody knows.
Yeah. Now, when you and Kevin got on the raft, step us through sort of the moments that sort of unfolded shortly thereafter. Okay.
So Kevin told me that Carl is probably lying and there is no canyon, because we didn't know. This place, the impossible place, of course, wasn't on the map, and we didn't know the river. But Kevin said to be cautious, just in case he's not lying, I'll ask him exactly. So Kevin sat with him, and Carl explained to him how to stop before we get inside that cajon, that box, that walled canyon that is impassable and full of waterfalls and rapids and terrible, I don't know, the highest scale, level of rafting, just white water gushing. And so, and it was, again, we never been down this river. It was pretty, how can I say, irresponsible what we did. But we were supposed to see some signs, like there'll be an island and we'll see some shore. Of course, this is total nonsense because the Amazon changes all the time. Islands disappears, shores disappears. It depends on the level of the water. And so anyway, we were all very unexperienced and naive. So we took the raft, and the plan was to, if there is a canyon, to stop before the canyon. 3 hours later, all happened very fast, and we were just dragged into the canyon. And there was nothing that we can do to stop. And we were just taken by the water inside that canyon. But at the entrance of this canyon, we had an accident. There was a big rock, and we couldn't avoid it. We hit the rock. The raft came out of the water and climbed on that rock, and just hanging over rapids, and stuck. And we were trying, to actually release the raft from the rock, but we couldn't. No matter what we did, the pressure of the water kept. And this is all in the middle of a raging white water. And the pressure of the water is so big, so that we cannot shake the raft off the rock. And when it started getting dark, Kevin said, I have no choice. You hang on to the raft. I'll jump, and I'll make it to the right bank. Throw me. The right bank was closer, yeah? Throw me the machete. I'll climb up the cliffs. I'll get to the forest. I'll cut some vines. I'll come down the cliffs. I'll throw you the vines, put both backpacks on you, and I will pull you out. So this was a crazy, but there was no other thing, and just Kevin did it. He just jumped. And miraculously, he made it to the right bank. And he was screaming, throw me the machete, throw me the shoes. Also, his shoes he left with me. So I started feeling that the raft was leaving Kevin's weight, and the jump actually released the raft into the waterfall, like all these rapids under the rock. And I just managed to throw the shoes over, to throw the machete over, and then just the raft released, and I just went down, and the raft took me into the, down that waterfall rapids, and very, very quickly the raft just, it sucked me under the current, and I was for a long time just under water and just holding the raft. When I was spit out again, still holding the raft, and this was the last time I saw Kevin. Kevin was on the bank, like about 150 50 meters back. And he was screaming. I was screaming. The raft just cut the curve. And from that moment on, I didn't see Kevin. And for something like 20 minutes or half an hour, I just had the biggest ride. I went through the canyon. I think I'm the only known man to do it in this season. And also, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't do anything because I couldn't do anything. The raft broke to pieces, so I lost the raft as well. I lost all the equipment, and I cannot explain it really unless I'll tell you what I think, which is this was like the first miracle I experienced. I should have died there.
So the actual the rapids that you survived, were they extreme? Just extreme, like rocks everywhere, just full on, whitewash, and was it just like really treacherous?
It was, yeah. Look, it was. I remember the raft exploding. There was like a huge rock, like an island, and I saw it from afar. And I was just holding the raft, and I saw myself just like full speed running into a rock. The raft exploded, broke to pieces, and I just don't know. I just don't know how I found myself on the other side of that rock. And many rapids, waterfalls, rocks everywhere, trees that were caught. Look, there was no way to get out of there alive. And it was very easy to die. Again, you just hit your head against something, you just break an arm And I came out unscratched. So I cannot just even explain how this happened. And this was like 3 minutes. This was more like 30 minutes, So it's unbelievable.
So you survived the the raft exploding and the river rapids incident. What time of the day was this? Was this sort of like morning or afternoon?
No, this was already evening. When I got when I finally managed to get out of the water, I was still, at the end of this canyon. It was still very steep walls and there was no playa, just, a few rocks under the cliffs. So I spent the night between the rocks. It was evening already when this happened. That's the reason why Kevin jumped, because it was getting dark, and Kevin said we cannot stay in the water, and so all that happened already in dusk.
So not too far before that point, you'd said goodbye to Marcus and Carl. Kevin's now jumped off the raft, and you've survived this incredible ordeal, and you've been washed further down the river, and it's dark, and you're now by yourself. What were you sort of thinking at that point? It's like you're looking around, and it's like, I'm a month into this adventure, and it's just gone to shit, and I'm by myself now. What was that? What were you sort of thinking on that first night by yourself, where Kevin's gone and the other two are gone, and you're in the middle of the Amazon jungle? What were you starting to think then?
The main thing was, in the morning, me and Kevin are going to get together, and everything is going to be fine. That was like the main thought. I knew he was alive because I saw him out of the river. I knew we were on the same bank. Yeah, we were both on the right bank of the river. And I knew one more thing, that he'll be running after me. So I was sure I just have to endure that night. And in the morning, I'll get together with Kevin and, we'll be fine. Together with Kevin, we'll just handle the situation. This was my state of mind. There was a lot of fear. I was also completely wet. I had no shelter. And I had no provisions, no fire, nothing. I just pushed my body between two rocks. I didn't sleep all night. I was just like lying there and cradled in my own arms and waiting for the morning. But there was something else, because in the middle of the night, I started hearing drums. And this was something that I never heard before. And this really got me really scared. And they kept on going all night, like boom, boom, boom. And this really scared the shit out of me. I didn't know what was going on.
Do you know what the drums were?
Yes. In the morning, I just kept hearing the drums. And at that stage, there was nothing I could do there because I was under a cliff and I was just on a few rocks. So I had to climb up that cliff, which was very dangerous, like 20, 30 meters climb on that wall until I got to the ridge. And then I started climbing up towards Kevin, but also towards the noise. Those drums kept on going. And just about something like 100 meters, something like that, up the ridge. And I looked down and I saw the drum. It wasn't drum. Those were logs from my own raft that were trapped in a how do you say it, whirlpool?
A whirlpool, yeah.
Yeah, and the logs were just beating against the rock.
Yep.
And I realized that this was the drum. And then I had hopes that maybe something survived, something of the equipment. And so I went down, and there was nothing on that raft. But then I heard another noise, which sounded like metallic noise. And I jumped from rock to rock in that river, making way upriver. And about 50 meters further from the logs of the raft, and again, which for me is only miracle can explain it, and one of the bag was hanging there. There were two empty tin bowls, and just cans, just tin cans, that floated it, and it was that metallic noise. And I burst into tears. I pulled that little backpack from the water, and I burst into tears. Yeah, it was like I couldn't believe that I found it. If you see the picture of raging water between walls, and this like little pack is waiting for me all night, with the logs banging against the wall, calling me, I was just in tears. And I pulled it out, and there was some, there was some rice, beans, a mosquito net, a red poncho, a lighter, a flashlight, some fishing lines, and a spray, a repellent spray, and that's about it. Oh, and some medicine.
Now, what was your plan of action? Kevin's sort of down on the same bank, some distance or some time further down. What was your sort of plan of action? Were you going to head in the same direction as from where you came? Was your main thing to sort of get dry or find shelter or just head back towards where you came from? What was your main sort of thing that you can remember?
No, it was very clear. I knew Kevin was upriver. And so I just was sure I'm just going to go towards Kevin. I'm going to climb on the ridge against the river, upriver. And I know that Kevin is coming down. He was above me. So I knew that Kevin is coming down to search for me. So I went up, to make ways and find him. And I was just walking up the ridge and screaming, Kevin, Kevin, and hoping we'll meet soon. And I was sure that once we meet, because he's got the machete, he's the strong man, he's the experienced guy, and so I knew that my only way to survive is to find him, and then, we'll be fine. But I had to walk the other way around, like I knew civilization was downriver, but I walked upriver because my purpose was to find Kevin.
Now, you didn't find him, the days sort of started to tick along. You'd be walking through like full-on jungle, uncharted jungle with no tracks, no trails. You just sort of virgin jungle, was it?
That's right.
What sort of animals did you encounter?
At that stage, I would see monkeys. I would see
Heaps of snakes?
I was looking for food. There were snakes, but this was, I just want to tell, before the animal part, there was actually 4 days where, I was like searching for Kevin. In these 4 days, I ate, I think, 2 snails and 2 palm trees. When I say 2 palm trees, that meant sitting under a palm tree and digging the roots with my fingernails until the palm collapsed. And then with a rock, breaking the top of the palm to try to get to the heart of the palm so I can hit the heart of the palm. I realized that I am actually exhausting more energy than I'm receiving by doing that. So in these 4 days, I ate, apart from what I'm telling you, I ate nothing. I had rice and beans, and I had a lighter, but it was raining so much that I couldn't start a fire. And so I couldn't eat the rice and beans. And then I didn't find Kevin, and I actually climbed far enough so that I could see the place of the accident. So I knew that I will not find him anymore. And at that moment, this was like my first moment of collapse, when I realized that I'm alone. For the first 4 days, I believed I'll find Kevin. But on that 4th evening, I just realized that I'm alone.
Yeah.
And that I will not find Kevin. I thought Kevin died. I thought Kevin jumped to the water after me. And I thought he drowned in the water. And then I realized I'm alone. And I just totally collapsed because I knew I'm going to die. Because my only hope was, to find Kevin. And so that was like, a big night for me. And like the dark night of my soul, where really my lifelong dream really became the worst nightmare possible. And then came the 5th day, and I turned back. I just started walking downriver towards civilization, which I knew was hundreds of kilometers away. And I had no clue how many days, but there was just no other plan. I just turned back and I started walking downriver. And so the first wild animal that I encountered was a deadly snake. This was actually when I found my first ripe fruit. Going down the ridge, suddenly I found that fruit, and I saw that I'm under a tree that is full of ripened fruit. Usually it's very, very hard to climb trees in the Amazon. But this one was close to the cliff, so I could use the cliff to jump on the tree, and somehow I got to the fruit. But then on the first branch, there was coiled a fruit snake that was very venomous. And actually, it just went for me. And at that stage, I just jumped off the tree. And when I landed on the earth, something happens that, again, I cannot exactly explain. I can try to explain. I think it's important. But what happened was that I just found the stick and immediately ran back on the cliff, jumped on the tree, chased the snake in the tree, hit it, and the snake fell off the tree. I jumped again to the ground, and I killed the snake. And then I just immediately pulled the skin off. I pulled the gut off, and I had the flesh of the deadly snake in my hand. And I actually didn't know what happened. I just didn't know how this happened. Because I couldn't deal with the situation. 2 minutes before, I was just a victim. He's about to die a miserable death, and there's no way in the world that I can survive in this environment. And then 5 minutes later, I just chased the deadliest the deadliest snake. I killed it, I skinned it, and I was about to eat it alive. I didn't, not for no other reason that I was actually under a tree lush with many ripened fruit. So I put the dead snake in my bag, thinking I'm going to use it as a bait. And then I just feasted on the fruit. This was like my first meal in 5 days.
Now, what was it like? I'm guessing the scariest part would have been at night. Was that something
right.
that you were dreading? You know, you're trudging through, you're lost in the middle of the Amazon jungle. You're sort of heading in a direction, all day with, starving.
Yes.
With, night is coming. What were you sort of, were you dreading the thought of the approaching night?
Yeah, it was impossible completely to go through the night, because during the day I wasn't afraid. I really wasn't afraid. And again, I can explain. I think that I wasn't afraid because fear was counterproductive for my survival. So it wasn't me. It was kind of like the survival mechanism. And I just had hope, and I was sure everything is going to be fine, and I'll get to civilization, and it was naturally. I didn't have to work myself up just to keep, like I was. During the day, I was fine in terms of my spirit, but at night, it was just impossible. Most of my nights, I couldn't start a fire, so I was lying in total darkness. I had no machete, so I couldn't make myself a proper lean-to or a camp. So basically, I would find a buttress tree, clean between the roots, break some palm fronds, and cover myself with palm fronds and sleep between the roots of the tree. The thing is that at night, all the nocturnals are out, and actually the big noise of the jungle comes at night, including the jaguars. And there were jaguars around me all the time. I rarely saw them, but I did see their feces and I did see their paws, and they were very close to me every night. Like in the morning, I would see a meter away from my head, I would see the fresh paw of the jaguar. So it was impossible to go through the night. So what happened through the night? I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. I didn't sleep. And my only way, and the only way that I survived, was what saved me from school, my ability to daydream. That's literally what saved my life, because I couldn't sleep and I needed to rest, and the fear was overwhelming. So I would just lie between the leaves and I would just screen movies in my head. I would just hallucinate myself out of these circumstances, and in that way I was able to rest and just avoid that fear.
Did you ever try and rest or even try to get some sleep during the day? Like at night, you really wouldn't have been able to sleep, but did you in the day try and utilize the daylight hours to try and recuperate somewhat, or try and get your energy back a little bit?
No. Only one time when I found a playa, and actually I called it the Jaguar playa, because when I came to that, it was very rare to find open playas on the river because it was the midst of the rainy season. This was already December, and in retrospective, this was the worst rainy season in a decade. It never stopped raining. So there are no playas usually because the river is so high. But I found one playa, and it was a sunny day, and I just took off my clothes, and I just lay just to dry my skin and to dry my clothes. I lay. I think I also fainted for a minute there, and so I maybe slept. I remember fainting, and I just woke up, but it wasn't sleeping. It was like really fainting, and that's the only day that I remember resting during the day. The other thing was some mornings I would be reluctant to leave my little camp. So even though it was like dawn and the sun was coming up, I would just cradle under the few palm fronds, and I'd say, no, a few more minutes, and I would just linger in bed, so to speak, before I got up and kept on walking.
How bad were the mosquitoes?
Look, the bugs were the worst enemies. I wasn't protected. Even though I had a mosquito repellent, I actually wasted it on scaring a jaguar, and I'll tell you that story. So I had no repellent. I did have a mosquito net, but another night I was attacked by termites that turned all my mosquito net into holes. They ate the mosquito net. And also I fell, and walking in the bush without a machete, I was scratched. So all my clothes, pants and shirt were torn, and my body was exposed. And I was bleeding from everywhere because all the scratches never healed because I was wet all the time. Nothing healed. So not only mosquitoes, also I upset, like wasps and bees. And sometimes I was like getting hundreds of bites from wasps and bees because I was trapped in thorny bush. Mosquitoes and also other insects. Some laid larvae under my skin. I was etching worms all my body. And also others infected me with very deadly blood infection. So for sure the insects were the worst.
Can you tell us about the Jaguar incident with the mosquito repellent and what happened? That was at night, was it? A Jaguar came up to you?
Yeah.
Could you hear it coming up?
I could hear it, but I put I took the flashlight, and when I lit was the flashlight, I saw it, and I don't know, it was maybe like 5-6 meters from me.
How big was it? Big enough to kill you?
It's hard for sure. For sure. This wasn't like a little mountain lion. This was a jaguar. It could easily kill me. But, the moment I put the flashlight, it just like froze. And I had a weapon, my only weapon. This was, I think, my 6th night. And because I was, so afraid at night. So my only weapon was the mosquito repellent and the flashlight, because I remembered that in one James Bond movie, he kills a snake with burning some spray, and I tried it, and I saw that indeed I can light the spray. So I was sleeping with the spray and the lighter between my legs. So I managed to get some, and I lit up the mosquito repellent, and it created a big flame, and I just held it until I completely actually consumed pretty much both the mosquito repellent and the lighter. But there was no more jaguar after the flame. And I just sat there, and I was trembling all night. That night I couldn't throw myself out with hallucination. I was just trembling there, crying and just trembling until the morning came.
You mentioned as well that that sort of time of year was it just continually raining, was it? Or just torrential downpours like all the time? G'day guys, Matt here. This podcast is a labour of love, and all episodes are researched, scheduled, edited, created and promoted in my spare time. Typically, after an episode has been recorded, it can take another 3 hours of post-production activities to get the final cut. If I'm providing you with value and you wish to support my vision of sharing these inspirational stories to the world, you can do so at borntokickass.com and click on the Patreon banner. Your support will help to maintain the monthly podcast running costs and enable me to outsource repetitive tasks so I can bring you even more kick-ass episodes. Once again, if you want to support me in producing this podcast, head over to borntokickass.com and click on the Patreon banner. You can't miss it. And now back to the rest of the show. You mentioned as well that that sort of time of year was it just continually raining, was it? Or just torrential downpours like all the time?
All the time. Now, the reason I say all the time is, first of all, it was the worst rainy season in a decade. That's in retrospective. But while I was there, this was my, of course, first rainy season. I come from an arid country. I grew up in Israel. I haven't seen anything like that. We have two creeks that we call rivers, the Jordan and the Yalkon. And so this was torrential rain, storms, tropical rainforest at its mighty elements exploding nonstop. And the nonstop means also if it stopped raining, under the canopy, you couldn't feel the difference because there's so much rain absorbed in the canopy that the canopy for days keep on just dripping big, heavy drops.
Yep.
So under the canopy, you just all the time, nonstop, always totally wet. That means also you cannot make a fire and not cook the rice and beans and not heal the wounds that are because they're wet. And also the worst part of it was that my feet, I just basically lost my entire skin from my toes to the middle of my shin. My skin, I just lost my skin to fungal infection from all that moist and the socks, muddy socks rubbing the skin of my feet. And I was just walking on raw flesh that was inflamed and pus and bleeding. I actually couldn't deal with it, and I just didn't take my socks off because underneath the socks there was nothing. Just,
Well, how did you endure the pain? Like, I'm talking the physical pain. Your feet are destroyed, many days or weeks of continually just being wet in the rainforest, plus with all the wounds and stuff. Not to mention the extreme hunger. How did you deal with the physical pain? Did it just get to a point where it was just painful all the time, and you? Yeah, how did you deal with that?
That's quite interesting, and I didn't see it coming. So it basically goes like that. Like the pain is unimaginable. Apart from the wounds and the many injuries in my body, and the worms eating me from under my skin. And the worst thing was every step was shooting waves of pain. And if by mistake I would step on a root, I would, it was excruciating. Uphill or downhill, where there's more pressure on the feet, I had to go down on my knees and elbows. The pain was unimaginable. But something happens, Matthew, and that's what's interesting. And you discover that the pain is one thing you experience. And the other thing that you experience is misery. And the difference between the pain and the misery is that the pain is in the feet and the body, and the misery is in your head. And the miracle that happens is that the misery stopped. Like, I just stopped feeling sorry for myself and just stopped, like saying, oh, I can't take it anymore, I don't deserve it, I cannot endure that. So just quiet in my head, and the pain remains alone. It's a different experience. It's like taking the sting out of it. The pain is still there, as painful as before, but the misery disappears. You just remain with the pain. There's no suffering of the pain. There's just an experience of the pain. this took a few days to reach that point, and it was like a miracle because I had to keep on walking on these feet for weeks. So that's one. There's things like that you can you cannot find out by reading a book. You have to go through a lot of pain to reach that point. But that was like quite amazing.
During the day, were you sort of on the move, sort of most of the daylight hours, or did you sort of, was that your plan? Sort of, when the sun sort of came up, your plan was to continually move down, continue moving forward.
Yes, I walked from, let's say, from dawn to dusk, and dusk is coming fast because the trees are very tall. So the moment there's a bit of an angle on the sun, it's becoming very quickly dark in the rainforest. So I, like an hour before, I already had my routine. I developed routine. So my routine was to, around that time, to search for a buttress tree, and I almost always found them. And those, they almost create like, they're very big, so they create like a room with two walls and no ceiling, but there's walls around you. And I would just clean the rot and bring my palm fronds and cover myself with the mosquito net and the poncho. And that's how I warm myself. I actually breathe. I put the poncho upside down, so the hat and the hood is actually covering my face. And this was partly ostrich strategy, so I don't see anything, nothing sees me. And another part was I could warm myself by breathing into that hood. And so that's how but I walked until that point, until dusk every day.
In the book, you talk about hallucination, like you had hallucinations, and then I guess beyond that was really vivid, I guess, to escape from the pain and the torment and the suffering that you were in, your mind would sort of conjure up fantasies and you'd escape into your own mind. Can you maybe talk about that?
Yeah. As I said, that's the only way I survived. Otherwise, I wouldn't survive. Because I needed to rest. And by actually using this hallucination, I really was cast out of that situation. I was in my dreams. Those were daydreams. I mean, hallucination. I made them up. But they had, they actually had some power of their own. It was quite interesting. There were about 4 of them, and I would just repeat them. So I made like 4 or 5 stories, and I repeat them. For example, the first story I made is that Kevin is dead, and I survived, and now I'm flying to Oregon to meet his parents and tell them about Kevin. And so it was about arriving in Oregon and finding his parents and crying together with them and telling them the stories that Kevin told me, etc. But then as I dreamt this dream the second time or third time, there was an accident in the dream. So the airplane, instead of landing in Portland, for some reason landed in Miami. And I had no clue why. But now I had to take the Greyhound bus from Miami to Portland. So the entire dream was about stopping at, like eateries, at fast food for 3 days. So it was like just about stopping in this McDonald's and, like whatever, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and just taking trays and piling them with food and eating the food. All the dreams, no matter which dream, I had 4 or 5 of them. I had one funny that me and my brother were running a ranch. But then the cook left. And so the entire dream became how I just interview cooks, and each cook tells me what. So all my hallucinations, they turn to be hallucinations about food. And this was out of my control, it seemed. And yeah.
You also mentioned in the book that one of the hallucinations that you experienced was you had like a vision of a girl who actually accompanied you for a while.
This was different. This was actually not an hallucination, and that's actually very interesting. This happened in different circumstances. This happened during the day, not at night, and it happened in one of the most dramatic moments, because on my 15th day there was a huge flood, and the flood pushed me to the hills. So I ran away to the hills to escape from the flood. And I had to rest in the hills for 2 days because the water, was so high. I needed to wait for the water to recede. And after 2 days, I was crawling down from the hill. As I said, I couldn't walk when it was steep, the inclination. So I was crawling down on my elbows and feet, and then suddenly elbows and knees, when suddenly I heard an airplane. And at that stage, this was 17 days into the ordeal, I was positive that this airplane is coming for me. There were no airplanes passing in this part of the world. I knew this airplane came for me. But I was trapped. I was far from the river because of the flood. I was under the canopy, and I pulled the red poncho, but there was no way that I can wave under the canopy with the red poncho. And the airplane just passed and just, and disappeared. And I was standing there under the canopy with the poncho in my head. And I just collapsed. I collapsed because that surge of hope was the worst thing that happened to me, For 17 days, I was strong. But that moment of hope when the airplane passed above my head, it's like something snapped in me, and I just didn't want to continue anymore. I just broke down completely, and I cried, and I started really praying just to die. I just didn't want to continue anymore. At that stage, I suddenly heard somebody else crying, and I realized there's a young woman next to me crying. And then I opened my eyes, and I saw her. And then at that moment, I suddenly realized that the airplane may come back on the same track. So then I started screaming, "Get up! We have to run to the river, because if the airplane comes back, there's still a chance to be saved. Come on." And I pulled her from the mud, and I started running with her. This girl was with me for 2 entire days, and I just talked to her in voice, not in my heart. I just literally talked to her all day. I pushed her, I promised her I'll take care of her, and it's only after 2 days when I also made her a physical place next to me to sleep. I chose a wider tree, allowing for 2 people to sleep, and I broke more palm fronds to cover her. And then I tried to hug her, and then I realized there's nobody there. I'm hugging nobody. And then I just was like shocked, because I thought I just went mad. This wasn't an hallucination, I didn't make, all my hallucination I made up. But it wasn't me that made it up, I experienced it, but it wasn't like the other hallucinations that was, I knew, like this was, I already thought that I'm a madman.
Yeah, that's it's hard. It's incredible for me to try and get my head around, that.
Look, this is if I have one more thing to say about it, is what it was genius. I didn't make this up. So this was, imagination, hallucination, subconscious, whatever rationale that can explain it. But it wasn't my doing. Like, I didn't plan it. I didn't, she suddenly appeared. So if she appeared, and even if she appeared from my unconscious imagination, the amazing thing is that it was precise. This was a vulnerable young woman that needed my help. That's what saved my life, you know. Actually, somebody dependent on me, that's what made me get up and move. At that point, I couldn't take care of myself. But the moment she was there, I just got up and I had to take care of her. It was genius, you know, like, and it wasn't my doing. So I cannot explain exactly how it happened and to explain this phenomena, but as I say, it was very, very precise. It was genius because it saved my life.
Can you talk about, I believe you got trapped in a bog and you almost died.
In like the swamp?
Yeah, you're sort of like waist deep, sort of trapped in a swamp or a bog. What happened there?
Yeah. Well, it happened twice in the same day. I think it was my 19th day. Yeah, it was the 19th day. And look, after the 15th day, which was the big flood, things changed because until that, I still found food, like a fruit that fell off a tree or an egg in a nest that I would break and drink. But after the flood, the forest floor was completely washed. So there was nothing to scavenge on. There was, you know, for the last 5 days, I've eaten nothing at all. By that stage, I was basically just skin hanging on bones. And also, because of it was so wet, I just couldn't recognize when the mud turned into a swamp. And the swamp was very quick. And, you know, the first time I sunk, I actually, after a few hours that I couldn't get out of the swamp, I decided to kill myself. And I told you that in the bag there was also medicine. It wasn't my medicine, it was Kevin's medicine. So I didn't know what was there. But there were like, I don't know, maybe 50 pills. And I thought I'd just swallow them all together. But then I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because it was 19 days, you know. I said, fuck it, you know, I should have done it on the first day. I'm not going to kill myself after 19 days, you know. And also I thought about my mother at that stage, and I said, no, I'm not going to kill myself. So what I did, I just jumped into the mud with my upper body, and basically I just swam in the mud and somehow managed to drag myself out of it. Then came another swamp, and then I don't know how much I fought the other swamp until I got out of the other swamp. But by the time I got out of the other swamp, I just couldn't get up on my feet anymore. I just was so exhausted, and my feet were so ruined. And I was just lying there, exhausted, and I just couldn't get on my feet again. And at that stage, I knew I'm dying. And I knew I'm dying in the wrong place, meaning under the canopy. That if I'm collapsing, I should collapse on a playa where an airplane can see me, not under a canopy, or for sure I'll die. So I needed to get up. And then I saw a tree that is covered with fire ants. It's a certain tree called Palo Santo, and that tree lives symbiotically with the fire ant. I knew that tree, and I knew that how painful the fire ants are. And in some instinctive way, I just crawled to the tree, and I got up, and I just shook the tree, and basically covered myself with fire ants. And the fire ants just, you know, burnt me and turned me. The feeling was like to be a human torch. I was just burning, you know, my neck, my arms, all my exposed body covered with fire ants. And that mad pain actually allowed me to get on my feet and actually float. There was so much pain that I couldn't feel my feet anymore. And like that, I didn't even, it wasn't my idea, really. It's just like something I knew I have to do.
So you used the getting covered by the fire ants and getting bitten everywhere. That pain overrode the pain of like your feet and all the other wounds and stuff.
Yeah. On waves of pain, like I kept on walking. And again, this is like, it's hard to believe. And I have things to say about it, Matthew, because, talk about extreme achievers and really heroes and survivors. I wasn't, I was really just a kid. And though I had many dreams that I'm a hero and a great explorer, I wasn't ready for that, nor did I believe that I can endure that. What I discovered that it wasn't even me, or it was me, but this was a much stronger, wiser me that didn't need it wasn't a process. It was survival acting through me. It's me becoming an efficient machine of survival naturally. And that's my biggest discovery about survival. It's a natural condition. In a real situation, we're just awakened to it, and we'll do anything to hang on to life, and we'll be surprised how powerful, how resilient, how resourceful we are in real situation. So this is actually my message also to the world, to other people, to trust that in a real situation, they know what to do and they're strong enough and they will deal with it.
Now, you were 3 weeks lost in the jungle. Tell us about the rescue and how you were found, and tell us about that day and the moment you realized that you were going to be rescued.
Look, I tell you, this is like fiction could not invent such circumstances. So what happens is that later on that 19th day, I find a playa, finally. So I know here I can collapse because it's an open playa by the river. And it's a big playa. So actually, the moment I reach the playa, I actually collapse. And when I collapse, I really know I'm not going to stand on my feet again. So crawling on that playa, I make my initial, like the letter Y, by rolling logs and rocks and creating a big letter Y on that playa. And then crawling away from the playa to the edge of the forest, because I've now experienced one flood and I know how dangerous it can be to be close to the water. So I drag myself crawling away from the river, and on the edge of the forest, I lie down, and the night passes, and then comes the 20th day, and I just don't move all day. I just lie there. And then comes dusk, and at dusk, I suddenly hear that noise, which is like a buzz, it sounds like a fly, but then it grows bigger and starts sounding like a wasp, running around my head. And I'm, deep in my hallucinations, but I open my eyes finally, and I'm trying to look and chase that wasp away. And there's no wasp. And then finally I raise my head, and when I raise my head and look around, I see a boat being pushed from the shore, from that playa, into the river, and people jump onto the boat, and I see the boat going downriver away from the playa. At that stage, I'm laughing now. I'm just, I'm not sure that it's an hallucination or not. But I see that boat, and I understand that this is the noise that I'm hearing. But they're going away. And so I drag myself, and I jump on my feet, and I try to scream, and I do not manage to scream, no voice coming out of my mouth. And I see, and I cannot run after them. It's all rocky, and the boat is just going downriver. And I stand there and, just looking at that. And again, in an unexplainable way, suddenly one of them turns his head and looks back, and then I hear a scream, "Yossi, don't move." It's Kevin.
Could you believe it?
So at that moment, it's hard to explain the complex and the emotions that rise in that very moment. But I was just, the boat turned immediately, and Kevin jumped, and he ran, and he was screaming, "Don't move, don't move." And he came, and, we fell into each other's arms, and we're just both sobbing and crying and crying. And then there were 3 other people in the boat, and one of them came and said, he came with an open can of tuna, and he asked me if I'm hungry, and I devoured that can of tuna, and then he said, come quickly, it's a very dangerous place. And Kevin carried me to the boat and put me in the boat, and then they pushed it downriver, and we went for an hour before he found a safe place to camp. But what's interesting about this story is, it's the amazing story of Kevin and how he fought and came back for me. But before I tell that, I just want to tell you that they searched for 3 days, about 120 kilometers of river, and they stopped to turn the boat exactly where I collapsed. And the reason why they stopped there is because they couldn't turn the boat in the current. They already decided to turn back, but the river was too swift and narrow to do the maneuver with the dugout canoe. Tico, the owner of the dugout canoe, couldn't do it. So he needed to land. And as I explained, there are no places to land. It's all high water. So he was pushed until he found that playa. He landed on that playa, and they just jumped off the boat, turned it, and pushed it back into the current. And this was the moment where Kevin burst into tears, because he realized, this is it. They're turning back. They didn't find me. This happened in the exact same place where I collapsed the night before, on 120 kilometers of river. So that's why I say sometimes, life is bigger than fiction.
Yeah. What are the odds? It's incredible. Yeah, that's such an incredible story. If you could sum up that experience in a paragraph or something, but was there a teaching that you got from that, or obviously you can't put it into words, but what sort of teaching did you get from that, or what did you learn from that in terms of being a human being and what humans are capable of? And
look, I have a lot to say about it, because I actually make a living by inspiring mainly corporate audience, and my inspiration comes not only but a lot from this story, but from other adventure stories of my life. So I can tell you many things that I've learned, but the interesting thing, to answer your question, is that the lessons came with time and perspective. So it wasn't that I came out of the forest and I was enlightened just by the experience. I actually was more confused, if anything, after the experience. I actually had a real existential crisis. And by the way, I didn't have any other crisis. I had no trauma. My injuries, it took a few months, but my body, healed. And I wasn't injured mentally or psychologically. I never had a session with any therapist in my life in that context. I never had even a single nightmare in my life about it. And I never even thought that this was a nightmare. It was a self-awakening. And so the crisis was existential because I didn't have answers. I actually had questions, and it brought me for years of exploration by other adventures in the world, physical, but a lot of adventures, inward adventures. And so when I talk today about my lessons from this experience, I just want to be fair and say it comes with perspective. It's from the man that I am today and not from the kid, 22 years old, that came out of this jungle. It took time for me to realize. But I can tell you, in essence, I told you already, the one big thing is, we are much, much, much stronger, much smarter and able and capable than what we believe. It's only death that actually makes us really appreciate life. It's only that situation of lack that makes you appreciate what you have. And by what I have, I mean two things. First of all, the basic food and shelter and security. And secondly, human connection. Those things became sacred, absolutely sacred, until this day. I always appreciate having a shelter, and I always call it home. No matter if I sleep somewhere for one night, it's a home for me. I appreciate, life itself for what it is. I knew when I drowned in that river, you will give all the gold in the world for one breath. But yet, when we breathe, we're full of worries and complaints about our petty issues. We don't feel that every breath is pure gold, and that every day and every meal is sacred, and every true friend is a blessing. And so those basics are not basic for me anymore. They're sacred. Also, experiencing miracles, you start seeing more miracles. Some people say, I don't believe in miracles. I also don't believe in miracles, because I know when you're not a believer anymore. So like fundamental things that have changed me. And with years of inquiry, they crystallize around some understanding and some teachings that I can pass to others. And I do that in terms of like empowerment, dealing with adversity, dealing with change, and being the hero of your life story, discovering your hero, discovering the calling, this incident with the girl, understanding that by actually helping somebody else, you find your true power. There's lots of learning that I can derive from my story. And these learnings, they keep evolving. As I grow as a human being, I can go and tell the same story, but find different teaching in it. So it's also very allowing. I'm not telling the story by regurgitating the same story of that 22 years old. I pretty much did today, but in the context of when I speak to corporations about my adventure, I tell a different story, which is that the story is actually a vehicle for the teaching. So, but it's all genuine and authentic, and there's two stories. This is my first story. My second story is even more amazing, because I went back to the same river and stayed there for 3 years. I made it my home. The very same river that almost claimed my life. In that jungle, I went back and stayed there for 3 years, and I made it my home. So I have that adventure story as well, taught me probably more than the first one.
Do you go there often still? Go back to the Amazon?
Yeah, because I stayed there for 3 years to help the indigenous people that were in that boat and saved Kevin's life and saved my life. I helped them save their lives by building a resort next to their village, allowing them to make a living. And they fully own the resort and operate it. And in the process, I actually completed my original dream. This is the most remote and isolated indigenous tribe in the entire region. They're called the Uchupiamona. And the Uchupiamonas, they made me one of them. I became one of the tribe. I am an Uchupiamona. I did get married but I brought my wife with me. So, but I did get married there in the middle of the Amazon, in the village, in a shamanic ritual.
Yeah.
I married my girlfriend there in the village. And I did find the gold as well, because the gold was creating something that has changed the entire region and changed my life and enlightened me in that sense, understanding the power of the forest and the wisdom of the forest and the indigenous people of the forest, and taking that wisdom and bringing it to the world. So this is like the pure gold. This is the treasure. So that child with his dream, I actually fulfilled it. It's quite amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's it's an incredible story. And you also do like today, consulting with businesses and Amazon survival skills for business. That's
right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. That's for me fascinating, because I'm so passionate about it and I so believe in it. And basically, when you think about Amazon survival skills to business, the intuitive thought will be just fighting tusk and fingernails and just the stronger survives. It's very Darwinistic, like survival of the fittest. It's a struggle, it's a war, it's a jungle out there. But actually, I lived there for 3 years, and I discovered that it's actually the opposite. It's the opposite. So it's true that it's the most intense competition on the planet, because the Amazon is like only 4% of the planet, but about 50% of all species are concentrated there. So it's true that that's the highest competition. But what's interesting about this competition is that competition makes every species to be at the top of their game. That's what happened, as I explained, it happened to me. Survival actually awakens you to be stronger, better, more focused, more calm, do the right thing, be wise. All this happens naturally in a survival circumstances. So this happens to all species. And that's why the expression, the survival of the fittest, is completely meaningless, because all the species are perfectly fit. So the survival of the fittest means nothing when everybody is perfectly fit. That's what happens in the Amazon. All species become the best that they can be because of the competition. So that's one interesting thing, that actually survival is good, because survival is spontaneous and instantaneous peak performance. Every business wants peak performance. Businesses should welcome survival, because it turns the team, the company as a whole, to be wiser, smarter, consolidated, and efficient. However, there's another interesting point. That energy of peak performance is not invested in competing with another species. So businesses, they take this energy, and competition is like almost a sacred value in business. Kill the competition, eliminate the competition, be better than the competition, do whatever the competition is not willing to do. And actually, that's not the way the Amazon operates. The Amazon operates in a much more efficient way. And that's really enlightening. You see, survival is efficient. To compete with another species is simply not an efficient survival strategy, because competition is actually not a good survival, because you waste a lot of energy by fighting somebody else. You get less, because if you fight for the same tree, you get less of the, whatever it is, the fruit of the tree. In the market, if two companies compete, they exhaust a lot of resources just competing. The prices goes down, they're less profitable. So there is an analogy. Competition is not an efficient survival strategy. So what is? Nature answers that. The Amazon answers that. The answer is innovation. Because what species do, instead of fighting another species, they just innovate by evolution. That's the technology of nature. And they evolve themselves to a niche where they can monopolize the niche. So they create niche monopolies. like every single species finds a way to create a niche monopoly. By creating niche monopoly is the exact opposite of competition. Monopoly means nobody competes with you. So when nobody competes with you, less effort and greater yield. That's what species do. Each finds a niche, and they don't compete with each other. But that does something to everybody, and that's, again, the enlightenment of the forest. Actually, a forest is an ecosystem. Okay? Ecosystem means we're all correlated, we are all interconnected, and we are all interdependent. So you cannot compete in an ecosystem, because if you hurt anybody, you hurt your own relatives, what happens to him will affect you. And if he falls, you will fall too, because you are interdependent. So it goes against the system itself. So also, if we take the analogy back to society, it's the same thing. Innovation actually makes niches. In the niches, you can be more profitable, but society as a whole wins because there's more diversity, there's more innovation, there's more new products. Instead of Me Too products and companies waste the money on washing our brains that one brand is another better than another, instead of innovating, creating a niche. An example will be GoPro in a market of cameras. GoPro creates a niche. It's not competing with anybody. So this is the analogy. Nature actually works like that. And so this is actually what survival skills to business mean. But, of course, I can take it much deeper and explain it in terms of economics as well, which I got enlightened by the Amazon, but I researched a lot and substantiated this idea also.
Yeah. Now, I believe you're a man of many talents. You've produced 2 albums as well.
Musical albums.
Yeah, musical albums.
Yeah.
You're a tech entrepreneur. You've a couple
That's
of...
right.
And also there is a movie coming out of this survival story that you've experienced and you lived through. The movie is called Jungle. And who's playing you?
Well, I'm really privileged to say that Daniel Radcliffe is playing me. If there's anybody that doesn't know, everybody knows Harry Potter. So, he's a very iconic figure and a beautiful man and a great actor. So I'm really privileged that he's portraying me in the movie. And
I noticed on your Facebook page tonight, you actually posted a link to the trailer. When's the movie going to be released to cinema?
Well, the world premiere is going to be here in Australia, in in Melbourne on the 3rd of August, opening the Melbourne International Film Festival. The movie is an Australian co-production. The director, Greg McLean, and 2 of the actors, Alex Russell and Joel Jackson, are Australian. The producers are Australian, and I am an Australian. So and also it was financed by Screen Australia, Screen Queensland. So it opens here in Australia, and it will be fun on the 3rd of August. The worldwide open premiere is planned for the 20th of October, and then the rest of the world, North America and the rest of the world, it's the opening date. So
yeah, I'm definitely going to watch that. It's going to be good. The trailer looks pretty good as well.
Yes. Talented people, and I'm lucky. It took a couple of decades. Hollywood wasn't interested 20 years ago when I first came there. It wasn't interested in true stories. They thought that my true story sucks because 2 people disappear in the middle of the movie. One stays alone. For half of the movie, there's only one guy on the screen alone in the jungle. There's 4 guys, there's no girl. And the worst thing, an Israeli protagonist, is impossible to make a movie with an Israeli protagonist. So they just didn't want to make the movie. But as you know, things have changed. And nowadays, true stories are the trend. and I'm lucky that this trend came. And this production and the talent, Greg McLean, and the writer, and all the producer, what they wanted is to tell my story, is to tell the story as it happened, and I really admire and appreciate, and I'm very grateful to them.
Yeah. And you've also got your book, I'll mention that, which I mentioned at the very start. I listened to the audio version, which you can get on Audible. It's called Jungle, a harrowing true story of adventure, danger and survival. And you've published a number of books as well, haven't you?
Yeah, no, actually just 2 books. But this book was published in 5-6 different titles in different territories. It was published all over the world, sold millions of copies all over the world. The amazing thing about it is that it's still selling. The story is classic, so it's not time dependent. Even though it's a story about the early 80s, it's not about the culture. It's about 4 men in the middle of the jungle, and then 1 man against all elements. So the themes are classic, and they don't date. So this book, as you heard, even though it's an old story, the story itself is timeless. And so the book is still now. Actually, the book is published with the cover of the movie, with Daniel Radcliffe on the cover, and so it has a new leash on life. And it's a very different experience to read the book or watch the movie. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, looking forward to that. Whereabouts can people find you online? Find your website and find out more about you, and reach out and say hi if they want to, like on social media. Whereabouts can people find you online?
Yeah, very easy. My last name is spelled with H, so it's Ghinsberg, but it's Ghinsberg. I'm saying that because with that last name, you find me on Twitter, you find me on Facebook. My website is ginsberg.com. Even my email is ginsberg@gmail.com because of the H in my Ghinsberg. The GH makes it a very unique last name. So if you know my name, very easily you can find my handles in Twitter, Facebook, my website, and then through my website you can just contact me directly. And through the social networks you can contact. I'm very accessible. I'm not a prima donna. I'm not a celebrity. And I'm here to serve. And this is what I do. I just want to explain that also with my corporate work, where I give keynote presentations all over the world to major Fortune 500 companies, I deploy the oldest trick in the book, which is buy one, get one free. So it's a program that I unleashed a few years ago, which means that anybody that books me, I offer them to give me for free to any charitable cause, to the community, to children, to old people, to whatever. But so every talk I give for corporate, I'm giving another talk just to give back to the community. So it's really a calling. It's really, it's rewarding, and I love doing that. And I think that now for me, the opportunity of the movie is, to expand my reach and to meet more people and to tell them my stories. As I said, apart from this lost in the Amazon, there's back to the Amazon and the story of how we built that resort, Chalalan, which is even more fascinating and more unbelievable than my story of survival. It's also more deep in the sense that this story is about 3 weeks of survival alone, and this story is of 3 years of living in the Amazon. So I love sharing this story because it's a true calling of, I believe, in the message of the forest and its people. And I think that if it's the story, just the same, the planet is an ecosystem. If we adapt the laws of the jungle from the Amazon to the planet, we live in a paradise. Competition is nonsense because competition is based on our belief that there's not enough. But actually the forest shows that the densest place in the world is also the most abundant place. There is enough. And if there is enough, there's no reason to compete. Why compete if there's enough for me and you? So there's a lot to learn from that and apply to the world. Also, I'm involved in the jungle itself, in Chalaland, the resort. I'm part of the village. I'm part of their cause to preserve this part of the world that is under pressures from developer, and the government wants to put a dam, and there's corruption, endemic corruption. And so I'm involved in bringing awareness to the Amazon and its people. It's still something that I'm actively involved. I'm going every year now back to the Amazon. I'm leading groups of people to the Amazon in the context of my corporate work, as in like rite of passage journeys. So it really, and I love it. I love it. I love being in nature. So I feel very fortunate.
Just one last question. Do you still keep in contact with Kevin at all?
Yes, Kevin and I, the only survivors of this story. In a strange way, Kevin ended up in Israel. He was a Catholic boy from the Dalles, Oregon, which is some 30 miles north of Portland. However, in that same story, after saving my life heroically, risking his life, coming back for me and saving me, back in La Paz, he met an Israeli girl, backpacker, just traveler like us, fell in love with her, and a year later he moved to Israel and married her. He converted, became a Jew, and he lived all his life since then in a kibbutz where he still lives. So Kevin became a kibbutznik, which is unbelievable, and lived near Jerusalem where he still lives. I, on the other hand, traveled for 25 years out of Israel, so I actually saw him just as I saw my family every time I came to visit. And on one end, we are like just family. We're like brothers. Our connection is very deep in terms of what we went through. However, as every story, it's complex. That night or that day when we split from Marcus and Carl is a day that we cannot forget. That's the toughest part of our story. And we don't remember that the same. As you know, Rashomon, like same people can go through the same experience but have different stories. Our story is the same, but on that day, our story is different. What happened on that day, Kevin tells the different stories than I tell. And it creates tension every time I tell the story in a big way. So when the book was published, Kevin, he took it very hard because the way I describe the split from Marcus is not the way he describes it. And same when my Discovery Channel did a documentary about that, then again, it opened a chasm, between us, and it took years to heal. And this is one of this moment again when this movie is actually telling my story. It doesn't tell our story. The story is our story. But I wrote it down through my eyes, so the movie is told from my eyes. And that creates a lot of tension with Kevin. But what I would say, that it's on values. We don't fight about money. It's about the memory of that day that we have the disagreement. It's so in a way, even our tensions, there's some depth and nobility to it. It's about values and how we honor the memory of our dead friend.
Yeah, well, it's been an honor speaking with you, and it's really an incredible story. It's bordering on unbelievable. But, you've lived it, you experienced it, and, it's been a real honour speaking with you and, listening to your story, and, it's been great.
Again, I'm honored to be part of your amazing list of unbelievable achievers. It was an accident. It happened to me. And it was really good. It was different to talk to you because I really connected to the story. And even for me, just to tell you that story, it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and
it is pretty full on. But thanks again for coming on, and I can't wait for the movie to come out. 3rd of August. I've penciled that in.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Worldwide, it's the 20th of October.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Yossi. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Cheers.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast at borntokickass.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes. Give a 5-star rating and a kick-ass review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard, and catch you next time.